This isn't just a story. It's a raw, unfiltered look into a moment when privilege clashed with dignity at 30,000 feet. A moment captured not for likes, but for justice. Meet Marcus Thorne, a successful black entrepreneur, and Bethany Croft, a flight attendant, whose smile hid a shocking bias. On a seemingly ordinary flight from Chicago to Seattle, a seemingly innocuous request spiraled into a racially charged confrontation. What Bethany didn't know, what the bigoted passenger beside her never suspected, was that Marcus wasn't just enduring. He was documenting every single damning second. This isn't just about an airline. It's about the silent battles fought every day and how one man turned his phone into a weapon against injustice. You won't believe how this story ends. And trust me, neither did Bethany Croft. The hum of the Boeing 737 was a familiar lullaby to Marcus Thorne. As a venture capitalist specializing in tech startups, air travel was less a luxury and more a mobile office. Today, however, his usual enthusiasm for the next big deal was tempered by a dull ache in his left knee, a lingering souvenir from an overly ambitious weekend hike. He settled into his aisle seat, 14C, on United Flight 8117 from Chicago O'Hare to Seattle Tacoma, his carry-on stowed neatly above. He pulled out his laptop, intending to review a pitch deck, but first a quick stretch. Beside him, in 14B, sat a woman in her late 50s, her hair a carefully coiffed blonde, her pearls gleaming, and her expression set in a perpetual faint disapproval. Her name, as Marcus would later discover from her boarding pass, was Carol Davies. She clutched a designer handbag, occasionally peering over her oversized sunglasses, at passers-by in the aisle, a silent judgment in her gaze. Marcus, accustomed to the eclectic mix of humanity, on planes barely registered her presence beyond a polite nod that went unreturned. Across the aisle in 14A was a young, seemingly nervous man, absorbed in his phone, occasionally glancing around with wide eyes. Further down in 15C sat a boisterous group of college students, already laughing loudly, their excitement for their destination barely contained. The cabin filled slowly, the usual symphony of bags, stowed greetings exchanged, and the inevitable jostling for overhead bin space. Marcus, a man of quiet confidence and meticulous habits, always flew with a backup battery pack for his phone and a small high-quality lapel microphone he used for recording voice notes during brainstorming sessions. Today, he'd subtly clipped the mic to the inside of his jacket, a habit he'd picked up after a particularly noisy flight where he'd lost crucial thoughts. His phone, a sleek new model, was recording a silent, almost unconscious act born of professional habit. He'd set it to record all audio, with the video function off, saving battery and ensuring discretion. Little did he know this seemingly trivial habit was about to become his most powerful weapon. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. One of them, a woman with a perfectly sculpted blonde bun and an almost too bright smile, introduced herself as Bethany Croft. Her voice, while pleasant, carried a slight, almost imperceptible edge of impatience. Bethany, in her mid-40s, had been flying for over 20 years. She prided herself on her efficiency, her ability to handle demanding passengers, and her unwavering adherence to airline protocol. What she didn't realize was that her adherence to protocol, when mixed with an unconscious bias, was about to unravel her entire career. The plane taxied, the engines roared, and soon they were airborne, climbing steadily through the clouds, leaving Chicago's sprawl behind. Marcus, after a few minutes of quiet contemplation, decided to stretch his legs slightly. His knee was stiff. He extended his left leg a little into the aisle, not obstructing traffic, just giving it some room. It was a small, almost unconscious adjustment, but it was enough to trigger Carol Davies. "Excuse me," Carol said, her voice sharp, cutting through the drone of the engines. Marcus retracted his leg, surprised. "Is there a problem?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "Your leg," she snapped. "It's in my space." Marcus looked down. His foot was perhaps an inch or two over the imaginary line, separating their seats well within the aisle's boundary. "Ma'am, I assure you I'm not in your space. I'm just stretching my knee." "Well, you're invading my personal bubble," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It's rude. People like you always think they own the place." "People like me?" Marcus asked, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He locked eyes with her, and in her gaze he saw it, the subtle, undeniable flicker of disdain. Before he could respond further, Bethany Croft appeared beside their row, her cheerful demeanor instantly replaced with a stern, professional mask. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over them. She looked at Marcus first, then at Carol. It was subtle, but to Marcus it was a familiar pattern. The assumption of guilt, the immediate focus on the black man in a dispute. "No, it is not all right," Carol huffed, puffing herself up. "This man here," she gestured dramatically at Marcus, "he's being disruptive. He keeps putting his leg in my space, and when I asked him to stop, he got aggressive." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Aggressive, Mum. I simply asked what the problem was. My leg was barely an inch past my seat, not even into the aisle." Bethany, however, was already siding. Her eyes, which had initially been wary when she looked at Marcus, now softened slightly as she turned to Carol. "I understand, Ma'am. We want everyone to have a comfortable flight." She then turned back to Marcus, her smile gone, replaced by a tight, professional frown. "Sir, we ask all passengers to keep their belongings, including their legs, within their designated seat area. It's for the safety and comfort of everyone." "But I was," Marcus began, trying to explain. "Sir, there's no need to argue." Bethany cut him off, her voice firm, leaving no room for discussion. "Please keep your leg to yourself. If there are any further issues, I'll have to involve the captain." The thinly veiled threat hung in the air. Marcus felt a surge of indignation, but he also recognized the futility of arguing further with Bethany. He was alone, and they were a united front. He nodded slowly, a calm he didn't feel settling over his features. "Understood," he said, his voice flat. He retracted his leg fully, even bending it more than was comfortable just to make a point. Carol Davies gave a triumphant, smug little smirk. What Bethany Croft didn't know as she walked away, her perfect bun bobbing, was that every word, every subtle intonation, every dismissive gesture was being meticulously recorded, and the silent witness in Marcus's jacket pocket was about to become the loudest voice in a court of law. The initial incident, though infuriating, seemed to settle. Marcus buried himself in his work, trying to shake off the lingering sense of injustice. He minimized his contact with Carol, focusing instead on the complex financial models on his screen. The cabin service began, and Bethany Croft reappeared, pushing her beverage cart. When she reached their row, Bethany offered Carol a warm, deferential smile. "Anything I can get for you, Ma'am? Perhaps a glass of wine to relax." "Oh, that would be lovely, dear," Carol purred, basking in the attention. "A dry white, please, and perhaps some of those nice Biscoff cookies." "Of course," Bethany said, her voice exceptionally pleasant as she poured the wine. She placed the glass and a packet of cookies on Carol's tray table with a small flourish. Then she turned to Marcus. Her smile vanished, replaced by a neutral, almost bored expression. "So, what can I get you?" Her tone was markedly different, colder, more abrupt. Marcus, despite his growing frustration, maintained his composure. "Just a sparkling water, please." Bethany grabbed a can of sparkling water and a plastic cup, practically dropping them on his tray table without a word. There was no offer of cookies, no pleasantry. It was a subtle yet stark difference in service, a microaggression played out in the small confines of an airplane cabin. He noticed the young man across the aisle in 14A, subtly watching the exchange, a flicker of concern in his eyes. Later, during a brief moment of turbulence, Marcus decided to use the restroom. As he stood up carefully navigating around Carol's outstretched legs, she seemed to take up more space, now almost deliberately. She let out an exaggerated sigh. "Some people just have no consideration," she muttered, loud enough for him to hear. Marcus paused, turning to her. "Excuse me." "Oh, nothing, dear," she said, batting her eyelashes, a saccharine sweetness in her tone that was far more offensive than outright rudeness. Just commenting on the lack of manners some people display. Before Marcus could respond, Bethany Croft, who seemed to be omnipresent, materialized once more. "Is there another issue, sir?" she asked Marcus, her voice already laced with suspicion. She hadn't even looked at Carol. "No, there isn't," Marcus stated, his voice tight. "I was just going to the restroom." "Well, please be mindful of other passengers when you return," she said, her tone implying he had somehow been disruptive, even by merely standing up. "We've had a complaint." She didn't specify who complained, but the implication was clear. Marcus was the problem passenger. As he walked down the aisle, he heard Bethany's voice, lower, now reassuring Carol. "Don't worry, Mom. We'll keep an eye on him." The indignity burned. Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing himself to breathe deeply. He needed to remain calm to not give them any more ammunition. He knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't just about his leg. It was about his skin. And Bethany Croft, whether consciously or unconsciously, was enabling it. He stepped into the small, sterile airplane restroom, his mind racing. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced such thinly veiled racism, but it was one of the most brazen. And now, with the flight attendant actively participating, it felt even more insidious. He pulled out his phone discreetly, checking the recording. It was still going, a silent witness to the unfolding drama. A grim determination settled over him. He wasn't just recording for his own peace of mind anymore. He was recording for accountability. Returning to his seat, Marcus noticed Carol Davies was now engaged in a hushed, conspiratorial conversation with the passenger in 14A, a man named Gerald Thompson. Gerald was in his late 20s, dressed in a casual hoodie, and seemed initially uncomfortable with Carol's overtures. He kept glancing at Marcus, then back at Carol, a conflicted expression on his face. Marcus couldn't hear their exact words, but he could feel the weight of their combined gaze. A few minutes later, the meal service began. Marcus had pre-ordered a vegetarian meal. When Bethany brought it, she practically slapped the tray down. "Here," she said, without making eye contact. Carol, meanwhile, received her meal with a theatrical flourish, Bethany even bending down slightly to explain the options. "We have the chicken or the pasta, Mom. Both are quite good today." "Oh, the pasta, please, dear," Carol simpered, and another glass of that lovely white wine. "Coming right up." Bethany beamed as if serving royalty. Marcus felt a profound sense of isolation and anger. He looked around, hoping for a sympathetic glance, but most passengers were engrossed in movies or conversations. He caught Gerald Thompson's eye again, and this time, Gerald looked away quickly, a flush creeping up his neck. The final straw came when Marcus, needing to access something from his bag in the overhead compartment, unbuckled his seatbelt. He was careful, waiting for the plane to be stable, and the seatbelt sign was off. As he reached up, Carol flinched dramatically. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she exclaimed, loud enough for several rows to hear. "Can't this man just sit still? He's making me nervous." Bethany, who was collecting trays a few rows ahead, turned instantly, her eyes narrowing on Marcus. She marched back, her perfectly coiffed bun bobbing with righteous indignation. "So what exactly is the problem now?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the cabin. Marcus lowered his hand from the overhead bin, his voice dangerously calm. "I was simply trying to retrieve something from my bag. The seatbelt sign is off." "You are clearly disturbing other passengers." Bethany stated, her arm sweeping towards Carol, who nodded vigorously, looking frail and persecuted. "This is the third incident. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to move to the back of the plane, or we'll have to consider other measures." The threat was clear: comply, or be seen as a threat. Marcus felt the eyes of surrounding passengers on him. The shame, the anger, the sheer injustice of it all was almost overwhelming. But beneath it, a cold, hard resolve was setting in. "There's no need for that," Marcus said, his voice level, though his hands were subtly shaking. "I'll just wait." He put his hands in his lap, the small lapel mic still silently recording, documenting every biased word. He knew what he had, and he knew what he was going to do with it. The twists were just beginning. The rest of the flight was a tense, uncomfortable silence for Marcus. He kept his eyes glued to his laptop screen, his mind, however, replaying every condescending word, every dismissive gesture. He occasionally glanced at Carol Davies, who now seemed to revel in the perceived victory, casting triumphant glances in his direction. Bethany Croft, for her part, continued her exaggerated attentiveness to Carol, almost as if making a point. Every time she passed their row, she would linger slightly, offering a solicitous inquiry to Carol, while pointedly ignoring Marcus. What they both failed to notice was the growing unease in Gerald Thompson, the passenger in 14A. Gerald, a recent college graduate heading to Seattle for his first job in tech, had initially been too caught up in his own anxieties to pay much attention. But as the incidents accumulated, as he witnessed Bethany's blatant favoritism and Carol's thinly veiled bigotry, a knot formed in his stomach. He was a quiet person, usually avoiding confrontation, but the blatant unfairness of what he was seeing chipped away at his usual passivity. He felt a moral obligation, a prick of conscience that wouldn't let him ignore it. He had heard Carol's initial complaint about Marcus's leg, and while it might have been slightly over the line, her subsequent remarks and Bethany's immediate unquestioning support of her felt wrong. He'd seen Bethany drop Marcus's drink, heard her cutting tone, and then the final threat to move him. He watched Marcus's calm, dignified reaction, and it struck Gerald that Marcus wasn't acting like an aggressive or disruptive passenger at all. He was acting like someone who was used to being treated unfairly, and yet was holding himself with immense grace. During one of Bethany's passes, she paused by Carol's seat. "Are you comfortable, ma'am? Is everything to your satisfaction?" she cooed. "Oh, much better, dear," Carol replied, casting a side-eye glance at Marcus. "Now that some people have learned their place." Bethany chuckled a light, conspiratorial sound. "Indeed," she murmured, then moved on. Gerald watched this exchange, and a cold certainty settled over him. He pulled out his own phone, but instead of his usual social media scroll, he discreetly opened his camera app. He didn't start recording video, but he began taking a series of still photos. He captured Bethany leaning solicitously over Carol, their heads close in conversation. He captured Bethany's back as she pointedly ignored Marcus. He captured Marcus sitting calmly, reading his laptop, a stark contrast to the disruptive passenger narrative. He wasn't sure if these photos would ever be useful, but he felt compelled to document what he was seeing. As the descent began, the fasten seatbelt sign illuminated. Bethany made her final rounds checking seatbelts and ensuring tray tables were stowed. When she reached Marcus's row, she paused, giving him a final disapproving stare. "I trust we won't have any further issues, sir," she said, her voice dripping with passive aggression. Marcus simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You won't?" He replied, his voice calm. "From me." The ambiguity of his statement was entirely intentional. The plane landed smoothly in Seattle. As passengers began to unbuckle and retrieve their bags, Marcus took his time. He saw Bethany at the front of the plane, beaming as she bid farewell to first-class passengers. He saw Carol Davies gathering her belongings, still radiating an air of self-satisfaction. And he saw Gerald Thompson making his way slowly down the aisle, his eyes occasionally flicking towards Marcus. As Marcus finally stood, he caught Gerald's eye. Gerald hesitated then. With a quick, almost imperceptible nod, he held up his phone for a split second, showing Marcus a flash of his camera roll filled with images. He didn't say anything, but the message was clear. He had seen, and he had documented. Marcus felt a surge of quiet gratitude. He gave Gerald a small, acknowledging nod in return. He now had not only his own audio recording, but also an independent visual witness. The pieces of his case were beginning to align. Stepping off the plane and into the bustling terminal, Marcus immediately made a call. Not to his office, not to his family, but to his attorney, Rachel Goldstein. Rachel was a formidable litigator, known for her sharp mind and unwavering commitment to justice, particularly in civil rights cases. "Rachel." Marcus said, his voice low and steady, "I've got a situation, and I've got the receipts." He briefly outlined the events of the flight, the microaggressions, Bethany's complicity, and Carol's overt racism. He mentioned the audio recording, and then the unexpected witness, Gerald Thompson. Rachel listened intently, her occasional indicating her keen interest. "Marcus," she finally said, "this sounds incredibly frustrating, but also incredibly strong from a legal standpoint. You've handled this perfectly by recording. And an independent witness, that's golden. Do you have his contact information?" "Not yet," Marcus admitted, "but I saw him flash his phone. He knows I saw it. I'll reach out to the airline first, give them a chance to respond. But if they try to sweep this under the rug, we go straight for them." "Good plan," Rachel affirmed. "Let me know what happens. In the meantime, upload that audio to a secure cloud drive and send me the link, and get a formal complaint drafted outlining everything." Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black traveler who had been made to feel unwelcome, unsafe, or simply less than in a space that should be universally accessible and respectful. This was about holding institutions and the individuals within them accountable. The drama on Flight 817 was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning to hit the ground. Marcus followed Rachel's advice. The day after the flight, he meticulously drafted a detailed professional complaint outlining every incident, every discriminatory remark, and every instance of Bethany Croft's complicity. He attached a transcript of the audio recording, highlighting key discriminatory phrases and Bethany's biased responses. He sent it to United Airlines Customer Relations Department, their corporate ethics board, and a copy to Rachel. He waited, giving them a reasonable time frame to respond. After 3 days, he received a generic boilerplate email from United Customer Care, offering a standard apology for any inconvenience experienced and a voucher for a paltry $50 off a future flight. There was no acknowledgement of the specific allegations of racism or discriminatory behavior, no mention of an internal investigation into Bethany Croft's conduct. It was a clear attempt to downplay and dismiss his experience. Enraged but not surprised, Marcus forwarded the email to Rachel. "They're trying to make it go away," he stated over the phone. "As expected," Rachel replied, her voice crisp. $50 for emotional distress and racial discrimination. That's insulting. They've effectively sealed their own fate." Rachel immediately sent a strongly worded letter to United Airlines' legal department, outlining Marcus's complaint, the irrefutable audio evidence, and the existence of an independent witness. The letter explicitly stated their intent to pursue legal action for racial discrimination, negligence, and emotional distress if a satisfactory resolution, including a public apology and accountability for Bethany Croft, was not reached within a specified time frame. Meanwhile, Marcus began searching for Gerald Thompson. He knew Gerald was heading to Seattle for a new tech job. Using his network and a little bit of LinkedIn detective work, he managed to find a Gerald Thompson who had recently announced a move to Seattle for a position at a prominent tech company. He took a chance, sending Gerald a polite, carefully worded message referencing the flight and his appreciation for Gerald's silent support. To his relief, Gerald responded within hours. "Mr. Thorne," the message read, "I was hoping you'd reach out. What I saw on that plane was appalling. I've got pictures and I'm happy to be a witness." Marcus immediately set up a call with Gerald, patching Rachel in. Gerald recounted his perspective, corroborating Marcus's story with precise details and confirming his collection of photographs. He shared the images with Rachel, which clearly showed Bethany's differential treatment and Carol's agitated expressions. "This is phenomenal, Gerald," Rachel exclaimed. "Your testimony and these photos are incredibly valuable." United Airlines, initially dismissive, started to feel the heat. Rachel's letter backed by Marcus's detailed account, and now the explicit mention of a corroborating witness with photographic evidence triggered a different kind of response. Their legal team, led by a sharp but unyielding attorney named Thomas Sterling, reached out for a meeting. The meeting took place in Rachel's office, with Marcus, Rachel, and Gerald via video conference on one side, and Thomas Sterling and a United HR representative, Ms. Eleanor Vance, on the other. Sterling, a man in a perfectly tailored suit and an air of detached professionalism, opened with a conciliatory but firm tone. "Mr. Thorne, we understand you had an unpleasant experience on Flight 8117. United takes all passenger complaints seriously, and we are committed to diversity and inclusion." Rachel cut him off. "Mr. Sterling, unpleasant experience doesn't quite cover what Mr. Thorne endured. This was overt racial discrimination, compounded by the negligence and complicity of your flight attendant, Ms. Croft. We have irrefutable audio evidence of the entire incident, and we have an independent witness, Mr. Thompson, who has corroborated Mr. Thorne's account with photographic evidence." She played excerpts from the audio recording, Carol's "People Like You" comment, Bethany's immediate siding with Carol, her dismissive tone towards Marcus, her offer of wine and cookies to Carol, while withholding them from Marcus, and her final, passive-aggressive threat. Gerald then shared his photos displaying the stark visual contrast in how Bethany treated the two passengers. Sterling and Vance listened, their expressions growing increasingly strained. The air in the room thickened with unspoken tension. The smug confidence that had initially characterized their demeanor began to crack. "Ms. Croft has an exemplary record with United for over 20 years, Eleanor Vance interjected, attempting to defend her employee. "She is a highly valued member of our team." "An exemplary record doesn't negate this incident, Miss Vance." Rachel countered, her voice unwavering. "In fact, it suggests a pattern of behavior that has gone unchecked. We have documented proof that Ms. Croft not only failed to intervene in a clear case of racial harassment, but actively participated in it." Sterling, realizing the gravity of the situation, cleared his throat. "We understand the seriousness of these allegations. We will conduct a thorough internal investigation into Ms. Croft's conduct. However, pursuing a lawsuit can be a lengthy and costly process for all parties involved." He was now clearly attempting to de-escalate and negotiate. Lengthy and costly is precisely what United's initial dismissive response invited Mr. Sterling. Marcus interjected, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, but there was an unwavering steel beneath it. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. We expect a public apology from United Airlines for the discriminatory treatment, a clear statement on racial discrimination, appropriate disciplinary action against Ms. Croft, and significant compensation for the emotional distress and professional damage caused. Sterling's face tightened. Significant compensation, he repeated clearly, weighing the financial implications against the potential public relations nightmare of a high-profile racial discrimination lawsuit with such compelling evidence. The meeting ended without a resolution, but the power dynamic had shifted. United Airlines, having initially dismissed Marcus's experience, now knew they were facing a formidable opponent with undeniable proof. The drama was now moving from the airplane cabin to the corporate boardroom, and potentially the courtroom. And for Bethany Croft, the karma she had unknowingly set in motion was about to come crashing down. True to their word, United Airlines initiated an internal investigation. However, Rachel Goldstein knew that without external pressure, such investigations often served as little more than a delaying tactic. She advised Marcus to go public. Marcus was initially hesitant. He was a private individual, but he understood the larger implications. This wasn't just his fight, it was a fight for systemic change. He agreed. Rachel connected Marcus with a well-respected investigative journalist, Clara Reynolds, known for her deep dives into corporate accountability and social justice issues. Clara listened to Marcus's story, reviewed the audio recording, and examined Gerald's photographs. She was immediately captivated by the raw, undeniable evidence. Clara's article titled, "Above the Clouds, Below the Line, Black Traveler Alleges Racial Discrimination on United Flight Attendant Accused of Complicity," hit the digital newsstands with the force of a thunderclap. It included excerpts from Marcus's audio, carefully chosen to highlight Bethany's biased language and Carol's racist remarks. Gerald Thompson, identified as a courageous eyewitness, also provided a powerful quote describing the unacceptable and humiliating treatment he observed. The article went viral. Social media exploded. United Airlines and Bethany Croft trended. Hashtags like "Was to fly United while black" and "Dersatsa accountability at 3,000 feet" dominated discussions. The public outrage was swift and intense. People shared their own stories of similar microaggressions and outright discrimination on flights. The airline's initial $50 voucher offer was mocked relentlessly. Bethany Croft, unaware of the storm brewing, was initially dismissive when the internal investigation began. She confidently maintained her innocence, believing her 20 years of service would protect her. When confronted with the audio, she initially tried to deny it, then claimed the recording was edited or taken out of context. She dismissed Marcus as a disgruntled passenger and Carol Davies as a nervous elderly woman. She failed to grasp the depth of her misjudgment. But as the public outcry grew, as her name and face became synonymous with racial bias, the reality began to sink in. She received hate mail, angry phone calls, and even threats. Her social media profiles, once private, were unearthed and scrutinized, revealing a history of racially insensitive posts that, while not overtly hateful, hinted at her underlying biases. One post casually dismissing a conversation about wokeness as ridiculous drew particular condemnation. United Airlines, facing a catastrophic PR crisis and the very real threat of a massive lawsuit, could no longer afford to defend Bethany. The pressure from investors, passenger groups, and even their own employees became immense. Thomas Sterling, United's legal counsel, contacted Rachel again, his tone now significantly more urgent, and less adversarial. Ms. Goldstein, we need to resolve this. Immediately. The board is involved. The CEO is involved. Rachel, sensing their desperation, laid out their non-negotiable terms, a public, unreserved apology from United Airlines, acknowledging the discriminatory treatment of Marcus Thorne, a commitment to mandatory comprehensive anti-racism training for all flight crew and ground staff, Bethany Croft's immediate termination, and a substantial financial settlement for Marcus. United, cornered and bleeding financially from boycotts and stock depreciation, capitulated. The next day, United Airlines issued a formal press release widely circulated and prominently featured on their website. It was an unprecedented apology, admitting fault and acknowledging the unacceptable and discriminatory treatment Marcus Thorne experienced. They committed to a complete overhaul of their diversity and inclusion policies, including a pledge for rigorous and ongoing anti-racism training, overseen by an independent external body. And then came the news that ripped Bethany Croft's life apart. She was terminated effective immediately for gross misconduct and violation of company policies regarding passenger treatment and non-discrimination. Her 20-year career, her pension, her professional reputation, all vanished in an instant. The hard karma for Bethany Croft was swift and brutal. She found herself unemployable in the airline industry, her name now a cautionary tale. Her carefully constructed life, built on the assumption of unassailable professionalism, crumbled under the weight of her own prejudice and the undeniable evidence Marcus had so meticulously collected. Carol Davies also faced her own consequences. Though not a United employee, her name was linked to the incident in follow-up articles, and she became a pariah in her own social circles. Her bridge club, known for its strict decorum, quietly but firmly distanced themselves from her. A local charity where she was a prominent donor politely informed her that her services would no longer be required. The subtle, insidious racism she had so comfortably displayed was now exposed, and the quiet judgment she had once cast on others was now directed squarely at her. Marcus Thorne, however, found an unexpected platform. His dignified handling of the situation and his unwavering pursuit of justice resonated deeply with people. He became a spokesperson for change, not just for racial justice, but for the power of documentation and accountability. He used a portion of his settlement to establish a foundation dedicated to supporting individuals who experience discrimination in public spaces, providing legal aid and resources. The drama had finally reached its painful, yet just conclusion for all involved. The flight that began as a mundane journey had become a landmark case, forcing a major corporation to confront its biases and reminding everyone that in the age of smartphones, every interaction, every word can be a potential record of truth. The dust settled, but the ripples of Flight 8117 continued to spread. For Marcus Thorne, the victory was bittersweet. While he had achieved justice and sparked meaningful change, the experience left an indelible mark. He became more vigilant, more attuned to subtle biases, but also more committed to using his platform for good. His foundation, Documenting Dignity, gained significant traction, providing a lifeline for others facing similar injustices. He often spoke at conferences, sharing his story not as a victim, but as an empowered advocate. For Bethany Croft, the termination was just the beginning of a downward spiral. Her initial shock turned into denial, then bitter resentment. She tried to find work in other service industries, but her name and the highly publicized termination followed her like a shadow. Prospective employers, wary of the negative press and potential liability, consistently turned her away. She attempted to sue United for wrongful termination, but the mountain of evidence against her, including her own recorded words, made her case untenable. She eventually had to sell her house, her comfortable middle-class life dissolving into financial precarity. The once bright smile was replaced by a haunted, perpetually angry expression. She became isolated her former colleagues and friends, distancing themselves from a woman now synonymous with shame and prejudice. The hard karma wasn't a sudden blow. It was a slow, agonizing grind, stripping away everything she had taken for granted. Carol Davies, though not losing her livelihood, suffered a significant blow to her social standing. Her carefully curated image as a respected, well-to-do woman in her community was shattered. The subtle ostracism from her social clubs, the polite but firm rejections from charities, and the whispered conversations behind her back chipped away at her sense of self-importance. She found herself increasingly alone, her once vibrant social calendar barren. The silent judgment she had passed on Marcus was now the constant companion of her own life. She tried to brush it off to pretend it didn't bother her, but the sting of social rejection was a potent, humbling force. United Airlines in the aftermath took their commitment seriously. The public backlash had been a harsh lesson. They invested heavily in their mandatory anti-racism training, bringing in renowned experts and making it a foundational part of their employee development. They established an independent oversight committee to review discrimination complaints, ensuring transparency and accountability. They revised their internal policies, empowering flight attendants to intervene more decisively in cases of passenger harassment, regardless of who initiated it. While it was a painful process, the crisis ultimately forced them to become a more equitable and conscious airline, slowly rebuilding trust with their diverse passenger base. The cost, both financial and reputational, was immense, but the lessons learned were invaluable. Gerald Thompson, the quiet witness, found his own sense of empowerment. His willingness to step forward, despite his initial nervousness, was lauded. He continued his tech career, but his experience with Marcus instilled in him a deeper sense of social responsibility. He became an advocate for ethical AI and fair tech, often speaking out against algorithmic bias and the importance of diverse perspectives in technology development. He and Marcus remained in contact, a friendship forged in the crucible of injustice. The story of Flight 817 became a case study, not just in legal circles, but in corporate ethics and social psychology. It highlighted the insidious nature of microaggressions, the power of systemic bias, and the critical role of documentation in holding power accountable. It became a stark reminder that in an increasingly connected world, there are no truly private spaces, and every action can have far-reaching consequences. The echoes of "people like you" and the dismissive tone of a flight attendant would forever serve as a powerful reminder that while the physical journey might end, the journey towards true equality and respect is an ongoing flight. And sometimes the most profound changes begin with a single courageous click of a record button. Years passed. Marcus Thorne's Documenting Dignity Foundation grew exponentially, becoming a recognized force in civil rights advocacy. He established partnerships with legal aid organizations, technology companies, creating secure recording apps, and universities, researching systemic bias. His face, once simply a symbol of quiet resilience, was now that of a respected leader in the movement for equitable treatment. He spoke globally, sharing his story with measured eloquence, always emphasizing the importance of remaining calm, collecting evidence, and seeking justice. He had found his purpose in the skies above Flight 817. Bethany Croft's life, however, spiraled further into isolation and regret. The constant struggle to make ends meet, the rejections, and the pervasive public shame eroded her once proud demeanor. She became a shell of her former self, the cheerful flight attendant facade, replaced by a hardened, embittered expression. She would sometimes see Marcus on news reports, eloquent and respected, and a bitter envy would twist inside her. The karma was no longer just the loss of her career. It was the loss of her identity, her future, and her peace of mind. She was forced to confront the true cost of her bias, a cost far greater than any salary or pension. She saw how her casual dismissals had not been victimless, how they had destroyed a part of Marcus, and how, in turn, they had irrevocably destroyed her. The realization was a crushing internal reckoning she could never escape. Carol Davies, now elderly and frail, lived a lonely existence. Her children, embarrassed by the public exposure and the social fallout, kept their distance. Her grandchildren, learning about the incident from older relatives, sometimes looked at her with a quiet, uncomfortable judgment. The vibrant social life she once cultivated was long gone, replaced by solitary days. She tried to justify her actions to herself, but the memory of the article, the quiet shunning, and the distant looks from her family gnawed at her. She never apologized, not publicly, not to Marcus, but the silence that enveloped her life was a powerful, unspoken indictment. United Airlines continued its transformation. The anti-racism training became a benchmark for the industry, evolving to address new forms of bias and microaggressions. They created a passenger advocacy board with diverse community leaders to advise on policies and handle high-level complaints. Their once tarnished reputation slowly, painstakingly began to mend, demonstrating that corporations, when pushed, can enact genuine, lasting change. The initial embarrassment and financial hit served as a potent, constant reminder of the consequences of inaction. Gerald Thompson thrived in his career, always remembering his small yet significant role in Marcus's fight for justice. He continued to be a silent ally in various causes, understanding the power of quiet observation and the courage to act. He would sometimes get emails from Marcus sharing updates on the Foundation's work, a testament to the unexpected bond forged on that fateful flight. The story of Marcus Thorne and Flight 817 became a parable of our times. It wasn't just about an individual incident of racism. It was about the insidious nature of everyday bias, the critical role of personal accountability, and the transformative power of a single recording. It taught that justice, though sometimes delayed, can be achieved, and that even in the face of indifference or hostility, dignity can prevail. The plane had landed. The immediate drama was over, but the lessons and the legacy of that flight continued to soar, inspiring countless others to speak up, to document, and to demand a world where everyone, regardless of their skin color, is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve, both on the ground and at 30,000 feet. 5 years after the verdict, the world had moved on. Marcus Thorne was a name synonymous with corporate accountability. United Airlines had become a case study in crisis management and reform. The story of Flight 817 was a memory, a powerful one, but one that had settled into the annals of recent history. For Bethany Croft, however, time had not moved on. It had simply stagnated, trapping her in a perpetual grey aftermath. Her life was now a collection of anonymous, low-wage jobs. The crisp uniform and the authority it conveyed were replaced by a stained apron at a 24-hour diner off a lonely highway outside of Phoenix. The confident stride down the airplane aisle was now a weary shuffle between sticky tables and the clatter of the kitchen. Her perfectly sculpted blonde bun had given way to limp, tired hair, pulled back with a rubber band. The years had etched new lines on her face, not of age but of a deep, gnawing bitterness, and a shame she could never fully escape. She had learned to live with the echoes. The sound of a customer snapping their fingers for a coffee refill would send a jolt of memory through her Carol Davies, imperious and demanding. A black man sitting alone at a table would trigger a wave of nausea as she relived her dismissive tone, her biased assumptions. Her own voice captured on that damnable recording, often played in her mind on a loop during the long sleepless nights. "Sir, there's no need to argue. We'll keep an eye on him." The words were a brand on her soul. One sweltering Tuesday afternoon, the diner was mostly empty. An old trucker nursed a cup of coffee at the counter, and a young couple whispered in a corner booth. The bell over the door chimed, and a man walked in. He was well dressed in a casual but expensive polo shirt and slacks radiating an aura of calm confidence. He took a seat at a table by the window, pulling out his phone. Bethany picked up a menu and a glass of water, her feet aching as she walked toward him. Halfway there, she froze, her heart hammered against her ribs, a cold dread washing over her. It was him. It was Marcus Thorne. He was older, of course, with a few distinguished flecks of grey at his temples, but it was unmistakably him. He hadn't seen her, his attention focused on his screen. Panic seized Bethany. Her first instinct was to flee, to hide in the kitchen, and beg one of the other waitresses to take the table. To be seen like this, a failure, a pariah serving the man whose life she had tried to diminish, was a humiliation beyond measure. She backed away slowly, her breath catching in her throat, and retreated behind the counter, her hands shaking. She watched him from the shadows of the kitchen doorway. He looked up when another waitress, a teenager named Maria, approached his table. Bethany watched their interaction, her body rigid with a terrible fascination. She saw how he smiled at Maria, a genuine warm smile. She heard his polite tone as he ordered an iced tea and a salad. She saw him thank her graciously when she brought his drink. He treated the young waitress with a simple, profound respect, the very thing she had denied him. In that moment, the last vestiges of her self-pity and her narrative of being a victim of cancel culture shattered. It wasn't about him being disruptive. It wasn't about his leg in the aisle. It was about her, her prejudice, her need to align with the passenger who looked like her, who she perceived as being of her class. She had chosen a side based on a deep, ugly bias she had refused to see in herself. Staring at the reality of Marcus Thorne, a polite, successful man, simply trying to get a meal, the chasm between her perception on that flight and the truth was a dizzying abyss. He finished his meal, left a generous tip for Maria, and walked out, never once looking in her direction. He had no idea he had just walked past the ghost of his tormentor. For days after Bethany was haunted, not by bitterness, but by a new, clearer agony, the agony of accountability. The hard karma wasn't just losing her job or her home. It was being forced to see herself without illusion. It was the realization that she had not just been unprofessional. She had been cruel, and her cruelty had come from a poisoned well deep inside her. A week later, sitting in her small, bleak apartment, Bethany Croft did something she hadn't done in 5 years. She took ownership. She opened an old, sputtering laptop and began to type. She didn't write to a lawyer or a journalist. She addressed the letter to the Documenting Dignity Foundation, knowing it was his. To Mr. Marcus Thorne. You do not know me not anymore. My name is Bethany Croft. I was the senior flight attendant on United Flight 817 from Chicago to Seattle 5 years ago. I am not writing this letter to ask for your forgiveness. I know I have no right to it, and I know it is not yours to give. I am writing because I need to say what I should have said then, and what I was too cowardly and too blind to see. I was wrong. My treatment of you was not just unprofessional, it was discriminatory and profoundly unjust. I listened to a prejudiced passenger, and instead of upholding my duty to protect all passengers, I became her accomplice. I allowed my own biases to color my judgment, and I failed you, my airline and myself, in the most fundamental way. For a long time, I made excuses. I told myself you were aggressive, that I was just following procedure, that I was the victim of a world gone too sensitive. But the truth, which I have been forced to confront in the silence of a ruined life, is that the problem was me. My actions were mine alone, and their consequences are mine to bear. Seeing you by chance, recently watching you interact with someone with a simple kindness you were never shown to me, was the final clarifying moment. I am writing this to you not for absolution, but as an act of confession, to acknowledge the truth of what I did without excuse or mitigation. The harm I caused you is a stain on my conscience that I will carry forever. I hope that the work you do with your foundation continues to bring about the change that is so desperately needed. I am profoundly sorry. Sincerely, Bethany Croft. She printed the letter, sealed it in an envelope, and mailed it with a trembling hand. A weight didn't magically lift from her shoulders, but for the first time in 5 years, the echoes in her mind grew a little quieter. Her karma had not ended, but it had transformed. It was no longer a cage of bitterness, but a long, arduous path toward atonement, a path she would have to walk alone, one step at a time. The story of Marcus Thorne, Bethany Croft, and Flight 8117 isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a testament to resilience and the undeniable power of truth. It reminds us that microaggressions are never small to those who experience them, and that unchecked bias can unravel lives. Marcus's courage to record Gerald's willingness to witness and Rachel's relentless pursuit of justice didn't just win a lawsuit. They sparked a movement. This isn't just about one airline. It's about every space we inhabit and our collective responsibility to ensure equity and respect. If this story resonated with you, if it opened your eyes, or if it empowered you, then please, like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that expose injustice and champion change. Your engagement helps amplify these crucial conversations and ensures that hard karma, both good and bad, finds its way home.